All usage of any kind of media, whether that be images and/or audio, are reserved for their respective copyright holders, and I, by using them, make no claim of ownership and am simply using them to give this video a visual flair for the audience. Hello, my name is Specs2. I think it's a large consensus that Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s is the most controversial installment of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime franchise, with many, if not all, aspects of the show differing from what came before it, including the art style, the stakes, the demographic, etc. Personally, I believe that the lower stakes of 7s is a positive, as it allows more focus than ever before on characterizing and developing the main characters in the world around them. One other aspect of 7s that is criticized is the legitimacy of its main protagonist Yuga Odo, due to his less than stellar dueling record, with 11 full on-screen losses in 7s and Go Rush combined, labeling him as the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist. Personally, I believe this to be an unfair characterization, as during the run of 7s I believe Yuga's dueling ability is done dirty by the writing, especially during Season 2. Now, I have no issue with Yuga losing, and I prefer seeing a protagonist lose occasionally, to provide easy opportunities for growth and development, but I can't help but feel that Yuga loses more frequently than most Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters. And it's because of this factor that the ceremonial duel of 7s leaves a sour taste in my mouth. After having lost his main rival Luke 3 times consecutively, Yuga manages to defeat him during their ceremonial duel, which is their 4th and final duel of the show. However, I draw issue from this outcome, because of the way Yuga's dueling is presented leading up to this final duel. I truly believe that if their 4th duel wasn't the show's final duel, Yuga wouldn't have won, as the build-up doesn't confidently portray Yuga as a duelist capable of such a feat, especially when you consider Luke was undefeated till this duel. With this rewrite, I wish to give Yuga justice, by improving his dueling record to better legitimize this win, if at all. But Yuga isn't the only character I wish to give attention to. I also wish to give justice to Luke. Now, this might sound odd, as previously mentioned, Luke remained undefeated till his final duel with Yuga, but with Luke, I wish to improve him as a character. Also mentioned previously, I prefer seeing a protagonist lose occasionally, to allow them to grow, and although Luke isn't the protagonist, this preference remains true for any character, regardless of their trope. My problem with Luke is that he appears to me as a very polarizing character, as he's presented mature, but also sporadically over-mature. Now, some people disregard his immaturity based on his age, but my argument is that this whole show is based on characters of the same and if not similar age, who never act so polarizing, and who also can't stand Luke's immature tendencies, which I'll point out when necessary. I wish to improve Luke's character by trying to keep his personality more focused and linear, with his immature and comedic tendencies being shown when it's appropriate. During this rewrite, I'll be going through every major arc of 7s, focusing on aspects of Yuga and Luke that I feel need changing or require attention to improve their characters. Changes being made will not solely be directly at Yuga and Luke, and I'll be making changes to other characters and plot points along the way. Changes to other characters won't necessarily affect Yuga and Luke, but are changes I wanted to make. The first change I'll be making is switching the result of Yuga vs Luke round 1, and have Yuga defeat Luke. Now, before I detail why I made this change, I would like to take a quick detour and reveal that Yuga could have won, and why I believe Yuga's dueling ability was done dirty from the start. First, let's set the stage for turn 3 of the duel. Luke currently has 4,000 life points, no cards in his hand, no set spells and traps, and 2 twin-edged dragons with 1,000 attack points on his field in attack position. On the other side, Yuga has 1,000 life points, the spell Pierce and the trap Dark Liberation set on his field, Dark Sorcerer in the graveyard, and he's just drawn to start the turn. He summons Mystic Dealer and discards Hydra Magician to use its effect to draw 1 card. He then summons Stray Familiar and Psyche the Child of the Wind. He tributes Mystic Dealer to summon Torn the Windweaver, to use Psyche's effect to return Dark Sorcerer back to his hand. He then tributes Psyche and Stray to summon 7's Road Magician. At this point, Yuga should have just summoned Dark Sorcerer alongside 7's Road and Torner. Yes, there will be one less attribute in the graveyard, meaning when he activates 7's Road Magician's effect, it will only go up to 3,000 attack points. However, altogether, Yuga would have a combined 6,100 attack points, attacking into 2 1,000 attack point attack position monsters, which is more than enough to win the duel. This misplay is baffling to me, because no matter what explanation I attempt to come up with has holes in it. One explanation I tried to come up with is that Yuga really wanted to show the comeback aspect of rush duels, so he knew that through his original combo, if he didn't get the additional attribute he needed, Luke would still have 100 life points and could probably win the duel on the next turn. However, this explanation is flawed by how Yuga was just put down to 1,000 life points in a single turn, meaning he himself could prove this rush duel aspect by winning anyway. Moving on from that, Yuga defeating Luke has more implications than Yuga proving he is initially better than Luke. Firstly, it creates an interesting parallel with Yugi and Pegasus from Duel Monsters. Yuga parallels Pegasus, as they are both creators, with the obvious difference being Pegasus was the creator of a whole game, while Yuga is just the creator of a format. On the other side, Luke parallels Yugi, as an up-and-coming prodigy of their respective creators' creation. Now with Luke, we haven't seen how he's a prodigy yet since this is his first duel, but we'd come to witness his dueling ability for the rest of the show. while Yugi had already proven his ability by defeating Kaiba. But in both these instances, the creator defeats the prodigy, setting up an eventful rematch down the line. Now, let's see the effect of this result change on our two characters. Starting with Yuga until his first duel with Nail, he would remain undefeated, and I think that would set up an interesting character trajectory for him. Until his duel with Roa in episodes 12 and 13, Yuga had no intention of becoming a king of duels like Luke, but only after that duel does he start to entertain it. And I think in this version, it makes more sense for Yuga to entertain it, as by being undefeated on screen, he'd have the belief that it is actually something attainable for him, since he hasn't lost yet. We see in conversation with Roa in episode 24 that Yuga claims he doesn't care about winning or losing, which makes sense, since he has lost more than once by that point. However here, his loss to Nail will be his first loss, so coupled with his frustration with Nail's maximum installation and his now desire to be the king of duels, Yuga does care as he feels any loss he takes now is a step away from that goal, and this aspect is meant to mirror Luke's view, which is a good time to switch to his character. By changing this duel into a loss to Luke, it would firmly put Luke in a rival position to Yuga, rather than the best friend role which could be given to Gakuto. The reason for this is Luke is in disbelief that he lost, but also that he lost to someone who doesn't even want to be the best. For a good chunk in 7s, I can see Luke letting this loss get to him in such a way that he appears more standoffish towards Yuga in a similar manner to Shark from Zexal. From this, by spending more time with Yuga, Luke would grow to like him more, but the loss would remain like an itch at the back of his head. What this also means is that Luke would initiate an actual rivalry between them. Now, I use the word actual intentionally because I don't view Yuga and Luke's dueling relationship as a true rivalry. The reason for this is that in past rivalries, the losing character usually makes it their goal, or even their character, to beat the character they lost to. The best example of this is Yugi and Kaiba's rivalry, where Kaiba makes it his goal to beat Yugi after the loss in episode 1. Another example of this is Yuma and Kaito's rivalry in Zexal, where after the near defeat to Kaito in episode 13 and 14, Yuga makes it his goal to defeat Kaito. The problem with Yuga and Luke is that despite being on the losing end, Yuga has the least care to best Luke at all, despite the number of duels they have. And at no point throughout the show does Yuga make an active effort to challenge Luke to beat him, rather they duel because of the plot, and in a few cases, Luke is the one to challenge Yuga, despite having beaten him multiple times. Given Luke cares more about being the king of duels, which is partially attributed to his late unknown backstory, Luke would make an active effort to challenge Yuga when appropriate as part of his journey. What this would also do is eradicate a lot of his immaturity. A lot of Luke's more undesirable qualities, at least to me, are a result of his initial arrogance and boasting of being the best duelist of the school. But by having this loss, it would humble him in a manner like Jack Atlas losing to Yusei during the Fortune Cup in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, wherein Jack spends a good chunk of time reflecting on his past personality and actions and improves as a character. Like this, Luke would rein in more of his immaturity when around others, and occasionally he would duel a bit stoically, like saying certain phrases twice, but never going over the top nor too comedic. This one change sets up a lot for Yuga and Luke for the rest of this ride, and these aspects will be developed further as we continue. With no other changes required for the first arc, we can now move on to the Maximum arc. Overall, I really enjoyed the Maximum arc, but have an issue with its pacing. This arc draws parallels to the second arc of 7's sequel show Go Rush's Rovian arc, as they share some defining aspects: a new dual mechanic, the protagonist losing to the new mechanic in its debut, and the protagonist using the new mechanic to defeat the arc antagonist. Go Rush's version has better pacing, as the big setback involving the new mechanic occurs during episode 20, the 7th episode of the arc, leaving 6 episodes for conclusion. However, with 7's, this setback occurs in episode 23, leaving only 3 episodes, basically only 1, since the final 2 are for the rematch duel. Personally, I would have Yuga vs Nail round 1 at least 1 episode earlier, to at least allow a minimum of 2 before Yuga vs Nail round 2. Doing so would allow for more time to be spent on the 2 key factors besides the duel: Yuga's depression and the trio's search. With Yuga's part, I found it interesting and honestly quite mature to see him go to Roa about his feelings, despite having only befriended him quite recently after an indirect multiple years long grudge. However, with the rush pacing, Yuga doesn't really get out of his depression because of the conversation, but rather because the plot said so after he is notified about the 3 consecutive penalties. By spending a bit more time with Yuga and Roa's conversation, I'd have Yuga get out of his depression, then notice the 3 penalties, but instead of being discouraged, get more pumped and excited, much to Roa's confusion and eventual surrender. Yuga would still slightly be discouraged by the concept of using Luke, Roman and Gakuto's ID cards, but all this means is it takes less convincing for him to get on board. Moving to the other aspect, we have Luke, Roman and Gakuto search for clues. This is the aspect that I believe required more attention because of the way it's shown. All 3 characters are searching for their clues in their own unique ways until they all reach the same idea of going to Otis, leading to 3 1v1 duels between them and Otis, with the knowledge no matter whether they win or lose, they'll receive penalties testing their resolve. Like Yuga going to see Roa, I like this idea, but dislike how it's presented, as we only really see Gakuto's duel. Now I figure it's because of the fact that Luke has dueled Otis before, which is why he was initially banned from dueling, having his account replenished at the end of episode 1, so it proves he's capable of defeating Otis. Gakuto hasn't actually won a duel by this point, so it's logical to assume he's the least likely to defeat Otis, but Roman has won 2 duels, so I'm unsure why we didn't see her duel. I'm also not the biggest fan of all 3 going to see Otis at the same time, as that really enforces not seeing all 3 duels, and even with another episode, all you would have to do is have all 3 going at separate times. Then these 3 duels could visually be spliced together, making them appear simultaneously even though they aren't. Lastly, Luke choosing to sacrifice his ID card to Yuga for his potential maximum has a lot more going for him in this version. As mentioned previously, Luke has let the defeat to Yuga lead him to the point of being more standoffish, but from then till now, we would see a progression of Luke enjoying Yuga's company and slowly seeing him more as a friend but still a rival in the back of his head. So by giving him his ID card, this truly shows Luke valuing his friendship with Yuga over their rivalry, knowing that by doing so, he has given up on his goal of being the king of duels, as he recognises that's the least important thing in the current situation. With that done, we can move on to the Machine Cavalry Club arc. Much like with the Maxim arc, no changes are required to the Machine Cavalry Club arc plot for Yuga and Luke, but rather some discussion on their progression during this arc. After having won his duel versus Nail, Yuga's progression is going to remain mostly stagnant, given he's presented as a paragon for the rest of his friends and allies to rally around. On the other hand, there is much to be discussed about Luke's progression during this arc. As mentioned previously, my issue with Luke is his immaturity, and I believe his presentation in this arc is the biggest offender of this issue, specifically shown in 2 episodes, 27 and 37. With episode 27, Luke creates his self-proclaimed Luke Rush Duel Club, and in failing to recruit other members he starts to duel himself, and eventually starts to cry about it before somehow dueling a ghostly version of himself. Now I'm sure we as the audience are meant to feel sorry for Luke, but I can't help but not, because prior, Luke attempts various ill-conceived tactics to recruit members that don't work, so I don't feel as sorry as the moment should make me feel. I'm going to flip this episode to continue Luke's character arc. Instead of creating a self-proclaimed Rush Duel Club, Luke starts a series of days where he lies to Yuga, Roman and Gakuto about joining school clubs, where instead he goes to an isolated section of the school to practice rush duels. The other 3 try to investigate their school clubs but instead get stalled by them. Getting back to Luke, having witnessed Yuga's recent uptick in skill when dueling Nail, Luke has started to panic about Yuga getting too good too quickly and not being able to catch up with him. During a self-duel in his own frustration, Luke will still duel a ghostly figure, but instead of himself, it would be a ghostly figure of Yuga, in a similar manner to when Manjome envisions Judai in GX episode 24 when he's lost at sea. This phantom would trance Luke for most of the duel, till Luke realises the truth before his final turn. Yuga has always dueled for fun, and even after losing to Nail, still dueled in a good mood in their rematch, and this is the dichotomy I wanted to create using Yuga and Luke. Yuga represents a casual duelist always dueling for fun, like Yugi, while Luke represents a more competitive duelist who desires victory above all, like Kaiba. After this realization, Luke would still win the duel and go join his friends in having fun, and from this point on, Luke takes more joy when he duels, not just obsessing over winning. And for the biggest, most frustrating offender of Luke's immaturity is episode 37, Luke vs Shubel and Hatrap. Now to the audience it already appears absurd that we're watching Luke basically duel a pigeon, but given it doesn't drastically affect the duel we can let it slide. What I can't let slide is Luke deciding it's a good idea to imitate pigeon noises in his dialogue. To me this is Luke blatantly mocking his opponent, which makes even the bystanders a bit uncomfortable. But that's not the worst part. After having lost the duel, Shubel starts narrating his backstory regarding his relationship with Hatrap, but during it Luke continues making unnecessary pigeon noises, which is completely inappropriate. I remember this being the episode where I was still unsure how I felt about Luke, having let go of most of his previous misgivings, but this episode sold me on mostly disliking him. In this rewrite of course this would be only slightly changed. Essentially all of Luke's imitating would be removed, and when it comes to the backstory at the end, Luke is actually quite empathetic towards Shubel and Hatrap, to then be mirrored by Yuga's empathy towards Asana in the very next duel. This might be an awkward change despite the seeming scale of it, but I think that just shows that Luke's more undesirable traits somehow feel forced, and in the end are just unnecessary. But with that, we can now move on to the most important arc of this rewrite so far. Before I actually get into the tournament arc, I want to give a brief disclaimer about how my scope on this rewrite is going to expand from Yuga and Luke to the rest of the cast moving forward. Getting into the actual tournament, there's the point at which Yuga has no intention to enter. We see in episode 42 when the tournament is being announced, Luke is struggling to choose between Roman and Gakuto to join a team of 3 with him and Yuga, only for Yuga to reveal he has no intention to enter, which enrages Luke. However, by the end of the episode, Luke, Roman and Gakuto collectively conclude that Yuga doesn't want to hold neither of them back by possibly taking their places. However, Luke takes a bit longer to realise why he remains angry about this. He's mostly forgotten about his rivalry with Yuga. Since episode 24, Luke has continued to support Yuga and conform more to being his friend, to the point he'd forgotten about his desire to beat Yuga. So more than anything, he doesn't want Yuga to join his tournament so that he can compete with him, he wants to compete against him. This is because Luke despises the idea of winning the title of King of Duels in the tournament, with Yuga still holding an uncontested win over him. In the end, Yuga does end up entering with Roa and Nail and acquires a new maximum Hyper Engine Bass Vulcan. I really like seeing Yuga align himself with two previous arc antagonists, as it indirectly frames Yuga as an antagonist relative to our protagonists of Luke, Roman and Gakuto, even though no one on Yuga's team are evil, especially when you consider that Yuga, Roa and Nail are dueling on the left side of the screen. In addition, Luke has improved and matured so much by this point that we actually are aligning ourselves more with his side to succeed over Yuga's. One more aspect before getting to the arc's climax is Yuga vs Otis round 2. While I do enjoy the duel in action, what I don't like is Otis appearing front and center out of nowhere. Before now, we'd only ever seen Otis as a hologram, which made him a more interesting character, as he had consistent mystery and awe surrounding him. But by him appearing on screen, it breaks all mystery surrounding him, especially when it comes to the giant hack that is discovered during the middle of Yuga vs Luke round 2. He becomes the obvious suspect from episode 43 onwards, and as soon as the hack is revealed, we all immediately know it's Otis. However, had Otis not appeared like he did, there would have been some time that the origin of the hack remained unknown. Given how much I enjoy the duel itself, I would just have Otis keep his cloak on and use a voice modulator as to not reveal his identity. Then after the duel, he makes his escape back to the relic. Just so that we have some idea who this character was, Otis could make a quote or at least talk in a way that would clue Yuga that it was Otis, leading him into the mystery behind the tournament. But with these two factors out of the way, we can now move on to the Battle Royale finale, Team Yuga vs Team Luke. One important change is that both teams would be drawing at 763 points. This of course means that both teams need 2 wins overall to win the tournament. As much as I understand that we are primarily rooting for Team Luke, who are being presented as the underdogs, this initially didn't work for me, as Luke had already beaten Yuga, but in this rewrite he doesn't. And with both teams neck and neck, and neither being actual antagonists nor evil, the scoreline would at least have the audience waver a bit on who they want to win. It also bothered me that there was no reason for these duels to occur, as Team Yuga had basically won as they were ahead, so it makes more sense for these next duels to occur as an actual tiebreaker. The first duel to occur is Roman vs Roa. Now this duel was great. Roa was the perfect opponent for Roman, as he was such a bully to Roman during the first arc. Roman beating Roa allows her to move on from how she betrayed her friends and lured them into the concert trap. While I enjoyed the duel, I would like to change how it was presented. Originally, it was presented as seeing how Roa and Roman duel alone, while it seems Roman can but Roa can't. From this you would expect Roa to win, if it's him overcoming a flaw or a weakness. Personally, I would flip this, where Roa is teasing and antagonizing Roman about being a traitor, and questioning if she has changed, to which she proclaims she has, and defeats Roa in the same turn. This would bump Team Luke into the lead 770 to 763, meaning they just need one more win to win overall. The next duel to occur is of course Gakuto vs Nail. As he might have been expected, I would have Nail defeat Gakuto. Admittedly, I did find it impressive that Gakuto managed to clutch a draw in this duel, but I prefer Nail to win for a few reasons. Firstly, this would draw the scoreline. Secondly, this would be a good win for Nail. After this duel, Nail only has 2 more duels, a loss to Asana and a win against Sebastian, neither of which are good for his character, with his peak remaining his debut duel vs Yuga. So at least with this win, Nail has had a standalone win against a decent duelist. In fact, the duel wouldn't have to play out too differently. Gakuto can still go for broke during Nail's second turn, except Nail will play a card that prevents him from taking damage for the rest of the turn. Nail would go into this duel having a small feeling that Gakuto will attempt to pull a draw, so he side decks a card that could nullify damage which he plays during his second turn. I can imagine Nail having a similar moment to Yuga in episode 26, where Yuga walks out behind his trap card, Trick card, and explains why he didn't take any damage. Nail would similarly do the same, which would be a callback, except it would be Nail fully explaining the effect of the card he played moments earlier. Now while this change benefits Nail more, Gakuto does get something out of this. While it's not as pronounced as some other character arcs this season, I did intend to introduce an arc for Gakuto, however this was the best time to point it out. As shown in his first duel with Yuga, Gakuto has usually dueled with Ronze and Rinosuke handling his cards for him. Eventually Gakuto starts dealing his cards by himself. While others dealing his cards, Gakuto has always managed to remain organised and focused. However, especially to the unpredictability of rush duels, he has had to improvise more, which has slightly messed with his confidence. He has shown some of his growth in his duels against Gallian and Ronze, but his downfall occurs in this duel. We see Gakuto break out into his Gaku-Ting persona, which really messes with him in the duel. Despite how this appears, it's how Gakuto is attempting to deal with the panic and stress he feels facing Nail. He eventually overcomes this after some stern words with Rinosuke, but after failing to destroy Yuga Drago, Gakuto realizes he'll have to survive or go for broke. As previously stated, this won't go to plan, and he'll lose due to Nail taking no damage. Gakuto will feel he has failed his friends, but both Luke and Roman are still proud of the fact that he still dueled Nail and attempted to at least pull a draw. Despite Gakuto losing this duel, his character arc will be completed a bit later. Now thanks to Nail winning, the scoreline is now tied 770 to 770, which of course means the winner of the next duel wins it all. Before going into more detail, I must outright state that Yuga vs Luke round 2 is my favourite duel of the show. Both duelists have had enjoyable and inspiring journeys during the entire season, several of their aces clashing with each other, Yuga almost winning with Vas Vulcan during turn 3, Luke managing to overcome Vas Vulcan the next turn, Yuga almost winning with 7's Rogue Force, to a shock result of Luke beating Yuga. Unfortunately, one aspect that does bring this duel down for me is just like in their first duel, Yuga could have won. However, unlike in their first duel, this one does require hindsight. Let's set the stage of turn 3. Luke has 4,000 life points, no card in his hand, multi-strike Dragon Dragius with 2500 attack and Dragorite with 1500 attack, both in attack position, and the trap 7 chance and Steel Strike set in his field. Yuga has 3300 life points, all 3 pieces of Vas Vulcan, Level Blast and Elemental Rush in his hand, and the trap 7's Road Force set on the field. Yuga maximum summons Vas Vulcan and uses its first effect to lower Dragius' attack by 700 and deal 700 damage to Luke. Then he uses its second effect to lower it by a further 800 for a total of 1000. However, what Yuga should have done is use this effect on Dragorite instead. This would result in Dragorite having only 700 attack left. Yuga can still use his level blast to deal 1000 damage to Luke, leaving him with only 2300 life points. Now if Yuga attacks Dragorite, Luke will activate 7's chance, regain 3000 life points, but in this scenario, he would have 2700 life points left instead of 3000. This is important because on Yuga's next turn in episode 52, all his attacks leave Luke with 100 life points left. This means the extra 300 damage he deals in his alternative scenario would mean, with all the attacks during his next turn, he'd win the duel. Like I stated earlier, this does require hindsight, however, it also doesn't. I can see that Yuga was attempting to go for exactly 2300 damage to win the duel, and if that didn't win him the duel here, he could at least destroy Dragius. My issue is that Dragius is not a threat to Vas Vulcan, and we see during Luke's turn straight after, Luke just barely destroys Vas Vulcan, losing more life points than Yuga does. Regardless, this duel is still amazing, and I feel in this rewrite Luke beating Yuga here is presented much better. Since Yuga has beaten Luke before and possesses a maximum, Yuga would be a bit overconfident going into this duel, and would probably make the fact that he bricked a bit during his first turn a bit more humorous. Yuga having a maximum would also be a better reason for Luke trying so desperately to acquire one himself, because he's aware that Yuga is much more powerful than when he beat him in their first duel. Speaking of their first duel, Luke beating Yuga would complete the parallel of Yugi and Pegasus, with the Prodigy defeating the Creator in their rematch. Furthermore, it would break the more recent trend of the protagonist always beating the rival. With Yuga beating Luke in their duel, this would mean that it would have been 6 years in real life since this last occurred, when Reiji beat Yuya in Arc 5 in episode 51. When Luke goes for game for the first time, we as the audience are already shook given the trope. Then when Yuga activates 7's Road Force, that's the moment we were probably all waiting for, the last minute protagonist card that secures the win. And straight after that, when Luke manages to special summon Dragius back to the field, the shock factor is even better. Going into this duel, I'm sure we'd all expect Yuga to win given the trope and history, so this duel pulls 2 back-to-back Uno Reverses on us, and having Luke overcome Yuga in this duel is much better presented. I won't lie, the fact that Luke manages to beat Yuga again does sully the duel, as well as Yuga's debatable misplay. I feel in this version Luke has grown to overcome Yuga rather than asserting already established dominance, as it makes Yuga look a bit pathetic, not being capable of defeating Luke despite acquiring the big powerhouse of the season. Despite that, this duel is still amazing. And to summarise the first season, all that occurred was switching the result of Yuga vs Luke round 1. This change in the long run does appear quite minor, but as we've seen, it does create an interesting ripple effect that I believe improves both characters and does provide some of their other duels with a bit more depth. As a result, their duel records have a minor change in them as well. Counting only full on-screen duels, Yuga has 15 wins and 4 losses, while Luke has 11 wins and 1 loss. Yuga and Luke both have a win against each other, though Luke does come out the first season as the better duelist. With that, let's move on to Season 2 and the Goha Siblings arc. Moving on to Season 2, we have the Goha Siblings arc. Now in this season, there are going to be significantly more changes. With this arc, the main idea is to change some duel results, their order, or changing duels completely, to better fit the narrative I wish to present. However, before getting to the duels, let's establish each team and their members. Our protagonist team is Team Rush, consisting of Yuga, Luke, Roman, Gakuto, Roa, Asana, and Tiger. On the other side, we have Team Goha, consisting primarily of the 5 known Goha siblings, Uro, Yujin, Yuka, Yuran, and Yuo, and also Nail. Technically Nail must remain impartial, but as we see, Yuo does force him to duel on their side, so I'm including him on Team Goha for simplicity. Just like in the show, the first duel is Yuga vs Goha Uro, which Yuga wins. It makes sense for Yuga to get the first win of this conflict, fresh off losing to Luke in the tournament finals. Just like in the show, Uro will be revoked of his presidency as punishment for losing. Likewise, the next duel will still be Luke vs Goha Yujin, but unlike Yuga's duel, this result won't stay the same, and I'm going to have Yujin beat Luke. This might seem controversial, but just like every other change before, I do have a reason. And the reason is Luke's ego. We see in episode 53 that Luke has gone to the extreme with his obnoxious personality, wearing his crown at school and intimidating some of the other children. Once again, Yuga, Roman and Gakuto find it difficult to be around Luke. I know some people might view this as contradictory, considering the development I had Luke go through, but I do believe that after achieving the title of King of Duels, winning a tournament in front of a huge crowd, and finally defeating Yuga, his ego would get a huge boost from this, driving his more undesirable traits to the surface. This was a point I made about how, having lost to Yuga in round 1, Luke kept himself more reserved, but having beaten him, he, in his own head, sees no reason to do so anymore. Not only that, but something I wish to change about episode 53 will be a quick prelude to this episode. It's in this episode that we first meet Swirly, who ends up dueling Otis. Before getting there, some time is used to show Luke's ego go into his head. While this is staying the same, I tone it down just a little, with Luke not outright antagonizing other students, but indirectly with just his presence, which he basks in. With Swirly being new and the only person not keeping clear of Luke, Luke would take this opportunity to take Swirly under his wing, and bring him to Otis to teach him rush duels, which Yuga, Roman and Gakuto curiously follow. It's in this duel where Luke attempts to coach Swirly through the duel, but causes him to miss timings and make misplays. This is something that occurs when Luke attempts to help other students at school in their rush duels, even though he's mostly getting in the way of how they want to duel. And this culminates in Otis' shocking victory. Some people might be shocked as to why I'd give Otis a win, but I do have my reasons. Most importantly, it provides some legitimacy to Otis' dueling ability. During the first season, Otis loses all 5 duels he has, which doesn't make him that threatening, even with the big rush duel uninstall reveal during episodes 51 and 52. By winning this duel, it would at least prove Otis can win, even if a bit clumsily. But the main point is that Luke's recent ego inflations is causing him to self-destruct, which then leads into his revised duel with Gohei Yujin. Having him lose his first duel after winning the tournament would not only be a shock result, but a necessary wake-up call for Luke. This duel could be framed similarly to the original Luke vs Shubel and Hadrap, but in reverse. With Euro having lost Team Gohei their first duel, I feel it makes sense for the remaining siblings to be a bit more proactive when challenging Team Rush. In doing so, they'd make constant surveillance and review their past duels and strategies. In doing so, Yujin would actively notice Luke's ego, and outside of fighting for Team Gohei, he wants to personally humble Luke. Given Yujin speaks by ending every bit of dialogue with the word tuna, you could have Yujin act like a fish for the first half of the duel, to try and lull Luke into a false sense of security, and given how Luke has been acting recently, he would easily fall into this trap. During Yujin's last turn is when he would flip to serious mode and absolutely smite Luke, taking advantage of Luke's arrogance and carelessness. In complete shock for falling for the trap and losing, Luke would fall into a similar depression to Yuga when he lost to Nail, except for Luke it's much worse, because he knows he can't blame anyone but himself. This is meant to mirror his first duel with Yuga, but with a twist. In both instances, Luke loses because of his arrogance, but in only one case was that the intention of the duel, that being with Yujin. However, when Luke lost to Yuga, Luke gave himself the excuse that it was his first rush duel, but in this case, it wasn't his first rush duel. He was experienced, but overconfident and arrogant, just like the former case, and lost because of himself, with no excuse in sight. And for that reason, Luke becomes a shell of his former self for a decent time now. With the score now tied 1-1, the next sibling to take to the field would be Gohei Yuka, who would still duel and defeat Roman. I will admit I do have a bit of bias towards Yuka, as she is my favourite out of all the siblings, but I do have some genuine reasons for keeping the result the same. Firstly, it makes the Gohei sibling more threatening, as they managed to earn 2 consecutive wins, win consecutively before the other team does, and beat the 2 duelists who beat Yuga in the previous arc. It did rub me the wrong way that Yuga and Luke won their duels, but then Roman and Gakuto lost theirs, and I wasn't able to take the siblings this seriously, as they beat the 2 weaker duelists out of our main 4, but by having them beat Luke, it shows they aren't to be underestimated, as Luke clearly did. The siblings also getting 2 consecutive points beats down the possible trend of both teams bouncing points back and forth, making this plotline less predictable. With Team Gohei leading the scoreline 2-1, the pressure and stress is really getting to Team Rush, and the next sibling to take to the field is Yoran. He will duel Gakuto like normal, except I am changing the result here and having Gakuto beat Yoran. This is a duel I hinted to earlier, in which Gakuto would complete his character arc. Despite Yoran being a new duelist, this doesn't change how similarly Gakuto feels in his duel against Nail. Gakuto is still nervous because the pressure is on him to at least tie the scoreline. 2 of his best friends have been defeated consecutively, and he has the hidden decay in his self-confidence after his duel with Nail, but in the end, he manages to overcome this, regain his self-confidence, remains calm and focused, and in the end manages to win the duel. This not only helps him, but also boosts the self-esteem of all of Team Rush. This is the kind of win Gakuto needed. Not just a win, but a win that his friends can celebrate and be proud of him for. With this win, the score is now tied 2-2, and Yoran, much like Euro, has his presidency revoked. As you might expect, Yuka is not going to be happy, and given her fiery personality, she rushes back to the field to retake the scoreline. Usually, this is where Yuga vs Euro occurs. However, I want to play more into Euro playing the long game as part of his hostile takeover. Roa will still duel and defeat Yuka. This duel definitely didn't disappoint, especially with the symbolism of Ro's normal monsters representing Roman, Ushiro and Getter, and hearing Miniscape in the background was as perfect as it always is. With Yuka losing this duel, Team Rush have re-secured this lead at 3-2. This leaves the only President siblings as Yujin and Yuo. Noticing how passive Yuo has been, Yujin pressures Yuo to duel next, which he gladly does, taking the fusion card he's kept secret from the other siblings. Yuo will still duel and defeat Yuga, destroying Vast Vulcan with his Metarion Ashura Star. I find this duel enjoyable because of how symbolic it was that the debut duel for fusions is won by destroying a maximum. The only downside of this duel is that you end up noticing that most of Yuga's losses are him being blindsided by a summoning method he didn't expect. However, compared to his round 1 losses to Nail and Asana, this one doesn't feel as bad, as had the turn order been flipped, Yuga might have been able to beat Yuo. In the end, the scoreline is once again tied, this time 3-3, and once Yuo returns to the 6 cross, Yujin decides to take a step back and maybe talk to the other siblings. The symbolism of this duel doesn't stop with the fusion being a maximum, but also with Luke. Ever since he lost to Yujin, Luke has been a completely different person, reserved, but different to his Season 1 progression. Since then, there have been a few moments that have almost snapped him back to reality, mainly Gakuto and Ro's victories. Despite this, he's still been a bit down. That is until Yuga summons Vast Vulcan, and for a moment this completely snaps Luke back to reality, until Yuo destroys it the following turn. This would strike Luke as much as it does Yuga, because of what it represents. Seeing Vast Vulcan again reminds Luke of the epic first season finale duel he had with Yuga, and how he, until this duel, was the only one who could claim credit for beating it. But not only is Luke shocked at Yuo performing a fusion summon, Yuo also destroys Vast Vulcan, not only putting him on par with Luke, but in Luke's eyes proving he's superior to Luke without even dueling him. This strikes Luke so much that he won't be present for the next duel for this and for another reason. As we see during this arc, Yuo is still researching how the fusion card came into existence. It's at this point where he decides to go to Nail to question him. Now originally, Yuo doesn't approach Nail till the Luke man switches sides. However, in this version, Yuo doesn't just want to research fusion, he wants to apply pressure to Team Rush by coercing Nail to duel for Team Goha, using him as sort of an attack dog. Just like in the show, Nail will still duel and be defeated by Asana, making the scoreline 4-3 to Team Rush. Now, it's in this duel that we see Nail question himself and his loneliness, to which he chooses to resign from Goha after the duel concludes. While I am keeping this point in this rewrite, I'm going to have Nail just be going back through an eternal struggle from this duel onwards. He won't resign immediately, but rather walk back to his quarters still questioning himself. Yuo, who is watching on the sidelines, is going to be furious and attempts to challenge Asana as he now sees her as a threat. But before he can, who should step out of the shadows but Luke, wearing the Luke Man helmet. Now, before I get to the duel, I would like to address some details. Like I mentioned earlier, Luke was not present for this duel, not just because of the sight of Vast Vulcan being destroyed, but also, as Luke was pitying himself in his bedroom, the previous night was the night the Luke Man helmet landed in his backyard. The Luke Man helmet is another reason I had Yujin defeat Luke. When going through this arc, I was debating whether to include the Luke Man as a character or not, because an issue with him is that it takes a toll on Yuo's villainy. By Yuo being defeated despite being a great puppet master, his status diminishes, meaning when he's defeated by Goha Yuga in the following arc, that doesn't help to build up Goha Yuga's character, had Yuo been the end villain for this arc. In fact, one idea I considered for not including the Luke Man was for Luke's big loss to be to Yuo instead of Yujin. Yuo be the one to run a gauntlet for the other characters, culminating in the finale duel being a rematch between Yuga and Yuo. But the more I thought about it, I realised the potential the Luke Man aspect had regarding Luke's character arc for this season, but to do so I decided to alter its function. Since Luke's current issue is his self-confidence, wearing the Luke Man helmet will supposedly give him a confidence boost, allowing him to act more stoic and heroic. Unbeknownst to him for the moment, all these actions are being done by the Luke Man and not Luke himself, whom Luke is completely unaware of. The duel will continue as normal, with Luke pulling a surprising fusion summon and defeating Yuo. Now usually, here Yuo would still do the same shenanigans to remain president, this time with Yujin, but it doesn't go down as well. As much as Yuo claims Yujin is committing treason, Yuo claims Yuo is committing treachery, and with both sides at odds, Yujin decides to challenge Yuo to a duel, not afraid of Yuo's fusion. We as the audience wouldn't see the duel, but after a brief glimpse away to see Team Rush's reactions, we'd learn Yuo defeated Yujin in a single turn. Yujin is revoked of his presidency, and Yuo still has the 6th Goha badge, keeping his presidency. The reason I decided to include this is also part of Luke's character growth that will be fulfilled in the next arc. Getting back to the Luke Man helmet, it won't just mysteriously disappear after the duel, but will act like a normal helmet that Luke can take on and off at will, or at least, Luke can lift the mouse-shaped visor up and down to reveal his face. However, Luke refuses to take the helmet off, and in doing so the Luke Man bonds with him more and more, much like the Venom symbiote. Yuo, observing Luke practice and continuing his research, has finally uncovered the mystery behind the creation of the fusion card, and as a result approaches Luke. Now the Luke Man has gained full consciousness and has started to cloud Luke's judgment, but instead of Yuo attempting to convince Luke he is the missing 6th Goha sibling, he convinces the Luke Man, not Luke, that Rush dolls are evil, and that Team Rush are the villains he was created to defeat. This is a twist on what Yuga does in the final duel of the arc, and this works much better than Luke supposedly believing he is the 6th Goha sibling. Since the Luke man has bonded so much with Luke, he is able to force Luke's body to move to his intentions, forcing Luke to board the 6 cross. It's here Yuo injects Luke with a serum to render Luke unconscious, allowing the Luke man free reign to control Luke's body, going into his perfect mode here rather than just in the final duel. At the same time, the ejected Goha siblings meet with Team Rush at Yuga's lab to discuss Yuo's current actions and how to stop him. It's here Yuo makes his move and decides to take the Luke man to the Machine Cavalry Club to have the Luke man duel Asana. This is a new duel that I believe would be interesting to see, and given Asana would have been informed of fusion. However, I don't believe the Luke man would need to use fusion against Asana. My reason being is that during the original episode, Luke manages to defeat Roa without the Luke man or fusion, and since Roa proves himself the next arc as better than Asana, this proves to me that the Luke man wouldn't need fusion to beat Asana. Regardless, the Luke man wins, and this will make the scoreline 5-4 to Team Rush. The rest of Team Rush will be alerted to the Luke man vs Asana and head there, while Yuga remains with the siblings to continue their research. After witnessing what Team Rush to believe to be a betrayal from Luke, this enrages Tiger, who immediately challenges the Luke man to a duel. Tiger chooses to step up as she believes she can wake Luke up from this trance or brainwashing he appears to be in, especially considering that Luke has always been terrified of his older sister. Despite this, the Luke man just sees the enraged Tiger as another supervillain to defeat, which he does, and in doing so, Tiger ends up afraid of the Luke man. It's in this duel that we learn a lot of Luke's insecurities that he's kept deep down, all being expressed by the Luke man, although from the perspective of Team Rush, Luke just seems to be narrating about himself in the third person. Tiger would share her more abrasive perspective on these revelations, which the Luke man would deny. This result ties the scoreline 5-5, meaning the victor of the next duel wins overall. Nervously, Roa is about to step up, until Yuga appears from behind, having completed his research along with the Goha siblings and a giant costume trunk. And this arc would still conclude with Yuga versus the Luke man. Now this duel was fine, and the way it was presented was interesting, with Yuga attempting to convince the Luke man he had been tricked. However, this premise works better here, as that is exactly what happened, when Yuo successfully tricked the Luke man earlier, so all the over-the-top presentation is fully required to convince the Luke man of the truth. The only change will be the circumstances in which Yuga acquired his fusion card. Don't get me wrong, the visual of Yuga catching a meteor on his dual disc is cool, but it's shenanigans. Yes, in the context of the duel and the show, the method of acquiring the fusion was seen as legal, but I don't like it. This is very much a Duelist Kingdom era moment, a king to lightning still having life points after his duel with Revolver, that the anime should be fully phased out of doing so by now. There is the gimmick of using ID cards to create maximum cards. However, that has been a concept for almost the entire show, and more characters than Yuga have taken advantage of this, whereas this meteor scenario is a scenario that literally only occurs for this moment, and nothing like it ever happens again. This to me symbolizes that Yuga can't defeat Luke, or even an alternative version of Luke in the Luke man without some need of shenanigans. Instead, what I would do is have Yuga acquire the fusion before coming to the field. The reason he was late from coming is that the Goha siblings must have figured out when Yuo acquired his fusion. Neil found where the satellite was, Yuga equipped Kaizo with extra equipment like in episode 52, and sent him into space to at least try to recover one of the fusion to use against the Luke man, as Yuga is smart enough to realize he can't reasonably challenge the Luke man without a fusion of his own. The audience would learn as soon as Yuga drew, meaning Yuga and the other siblings would probably be confident while Yuo prattled on about how impossible it was for Yuga to draw fusion when he did have one, and I firmly believe that this troll moment on Yuo could come close to the level of Vector's troll in Zexal. Yuga would use his fusion like normal, fusion summon 7's Paladin, win the duel, the Luke man would free Luke, and Yuga would agree to work at Goha in exchange for the other siblings to reacquire their presidency status, which Yuo would oblige with. Now we have reached the Goha Yuga arc, and an especially important change will be made. Swirly will not be revealed to be Goha Yuga. Swirly will continue to be a supporting character, but he won't be Goha Yuga sealed away. While I did enjoy this twist and the reveal, I feel there's a better candidate, and the reveal also occurred a bit too late into the arc, especially considering Goha Yuga was defeated 2 episodes later in a single duel. Instead of Swirly, Goha Yuga will be our Yuga, Yuga Odo. I'm sure I wasn't the only person who theorized the silhouetted figure in opening 2 was our Yuga, and then was disappointed after the investigation for it not to be our Yuga. I feel this would create better conflict given the main basis of this show till this point. Goha has been attempting to destroy Rush Doll since it was installed, and I think it could be interesting for not only the creator of Rush Dolls to be an antagonist, but to see how the other characters would react and feel. Yuga has always been seen as a paragon that most of his friends look towards. He's not perfect, but he's a nice person to be friends with, so to see how Team Rush would deal with their main friend being a villain would be interesting. However, of course, for this to work, Goha Yuga's and the other siblings' backstory will need changing, but I hope you follow along with me, because I had a lot of fun making it. Going back a few years ago, all 6 Goha siblings were the ones managing Goha Corporation. However, they were never seen nor shown publicly outside of the building, all working under the singular title of Mr. Goha. Being the youngest, Goha Yuga was a bit of a bully to other employees, threatening them to make sure they did their work, but the other siblings, especially Yuka, would manage to rein him in. One day, he chooses to leave the building to go for an unsupervised walk, and unbeknownst to him, Yuo was tasked by the other siblings to keep an eye on him. Goha Yuga walks for a while outside of the city to the point he comes across the abandoned amusement park. Going further, he finds a cave, and finds the 3 members of the Battle Bug Club, Nanaho, Kabuto, and Kirihito. The 3 ninjas invite Goha Yuga and start teaching him their ninjutsu, while Yuo watches from afar. Goha Yuga is taught the secrets of the ninja's mind control ninjutsu, and that to use it on another person, you seal the ninjutsu within an object, and use that object against your desired victim. This being the Yu-Gi-Oh universe, Goha Yuga chooses to seal the ninjutsu in a dueling card. While teaching him, the ninjas peek into Goha Yuga's mind and witness the dormant darkness within him. This is probably a good time to point out that Goha Yuga is in no way completely evil. He's just more aggressive with his intentions and more hellbent on seeing them through to the end. The ninjas decide to swear their allegiance to him, and after a while he leaves the cave while both the ninjas and Yuo follow. Goha Yuga leads them down into the basement area, where they wait in the shadows attempting to remain unseen, while Yuo warns and brings the other siblings into their basement area. While there, Goha Yuga was in the middle of creating a new card, but takes it out before it finishes to notice Yuo and the other siblings have found him. Realizing his intentions, Yuo demands that Yuga stops, but Yuga chooses to only oblige if Yuo can defeat him. This duel is an utter slugfest until Goha Yuga draws the unfinished card. Despite warnings from his ninja servants, he plays it. As the card is played, a dark cloud of smoke envelops Goha Yuga until it unexpectedly explodes, knocking everyone in various directions. Goha Yuga is thrown into the outer corridor, with several of his possessions scattered everywhere. His crown, his mask, his badge, his deck, his dual disc, and his ID card. The other siblings are thrown back into the wall, receiving some severe head trauma and complete amnesia regarding their 6th sibling. Yuo, despite this, manages to scoop the spare badge on the floor while they desert the room. At the suggestion of a mysterious employee, the siblings take another employee to be the host for the Mr. Gohadro. The next 6 best employees, including Mimi, are drafted into the hexagon, while the siblings take the 6th cross into space to recover from their ordeal. They are put into suspended comas until the rush tournament is announced, as someone manually unlocked their comatose states. Meanwhile, the ninjas have managed to recover the rest of Goha Yuga's belongings, but Goha Yuga is nowhere to be seen. The ninjas then spend the next few years searching for Goha Yuga as much as they can. However, they would only be seen in the background of the Goha sibling duels. The ninjas do suspect our Yuga, but given how opposite Yuga Odo is to Goha Yuga, it goes over their heads. Speaking of which, Goha Yuga, wrapped only in a cloak, is staggering through the streets, with his hair having completely changed, and seen collapse by a nearby widow. Not seeing anyone else around, this widow takes pity on Goha Yuga and takes him inside. Unlike the other siblings, Goha Yuga has complete amnesia and only seems to remember his first name, Yuga. The widow, having lost her husband a few years ago and having longed to have a child, chooses to adopt Yuga into her family, and in doing so shares her surname, Odo. Unbeknownst to anyone, the mystery employee finds the unfinished card in the basement and runs it through the machine, leaving it finished and waiting. This backstory might seem like a little much, but it does answer some questions that I don't think were fully explained. For example, the previous host of Mr. Goha that Mimi finds, whether Goha siblings were in space, why Otis would have any relation with Month Reborn, Yuga's single mother, and I think the idea that our Yuga used to be Goha Yuga is a better reason for them sharing the same name, rather than it being a coincidence that ends up wasting time on a pointless investigation. Getting back to the start of the arc, Yuga, Luke, Roman, and Gakuto have all taken jobs at Goha Corporation. Suspicious of Yuga's intentions, Yuo has Team Rush under consistent surveillance, meaning most of his time is spent watching them to see what they might be up to. The other siblings, meanwhile, are taking turns watching Yuo, as there is still mistrust between them given Yuo's attempted hostile takeover. In Goha Corporation, Gakuto has taken a job in administration due to his natural discipline. Roman is working in the creative sector, and in her free time is working on a few solo pieces which will become important later. Much like in the show, Yuga is attempting to fix his Vast Vulcan Maximum cards, which have started to glitch out. Unlike in the arc, he won't acquire his new Maximum during a duel with Nanaho, but rather in a different duel. Speaking of Luke, he hasn't taken a role in a specific sector, but rather is racing around Goha doing various jobs here and there, in unrequited competition with Yuga. Ranze and Rinosuke won't be working at Goha, but rather take care of the student council, but visit Gakuto regularly. While doing his own work, Yuga will also use his free time to create the custom format program, which is what his true motive was for joining Goha, as such a big idea could only be installed within Goha itself. Alongside it, Yuga creates a format deletion program as a last resort, but won't finish it before the big reveal. At the end of the first week, our group just managed to make the top 20 Goha employee leaderboard, with Gakuto 17th, Roman 18th, Yuga 19th, and Luke 20th. Naturally, Yuga, Roman, and Gakuto are happy making the leaderboard at all, whereas Luke is frustrated, not only coming in second relative to Yuga, but last relative to all his friends. At this point, Luke has become so frustrated that he angrily challenges Yuga to a rush duel, which he accepts. This is where we would get the infamous Yuga vs Luke round 3, and I would have it last an entire episode, with Luke challenging Yuga at the end of the previous episode. I personally have never liked this duel, purely because it ended up being complete filler, and another pointless showcase that Luke is a superior duelist to Yuga. However, the duel is more enticing to watch in this version because of what it represents. Luke feels guilty for not being strong enough to stop the Luke man for fighting on the wrong side, and while his friends have forgiven him for that, he doesn't feel worthy of their forgiveness. Not only that, but Luke is also secretly frustrated that Yuga beat the Luke man. Luke always saw the Luke man as a more refined version of himself, so if Yuga can beat the Luke man, then it is plausible that Yuga can beat Luke. Luke was keeping this buried down as much as possible, but the employee standings have pushed him over the edge. Luke's inferiority complex won't allow him not to be the best rush duelist, and he wants to prove to himself in this duel that the Luke man losing to Yuga was a fluke. Beating him here would reinstate his sense of security of the title of King of Duels, and let him move on. Unfortunately for Luke, this won't happen. This duel is going to last 5 turns, with Yuga going first, with Luke indirectly causing the new maximum during turn 3. The idea behind this is that in turn 2, Luke isn't able to be as offensive as possible and lets out an unintentional poly effect, creating Supreme Skystream. This is meant to represent Luke self-destructing, not currently capable of keeping his emotions in check. Luke will still fusion summon himself for the first time during turn 4, but Yuga will just about survive. Yuga will bring out a new fusion during turn 5, and despite being about to win, Luke will use a trap from his first turn to force a draw. It makes sense to me that Luke of all people would have a card that could force a draw, because in his current state of mind he is so unwilling to take a loss that he would take a draw. Yuga will be satisfied regardless and carry on, while Luke will wallow even further. Luke knowing that he had to force a draw confirms his fear. Yuga has grown and developed since the tournament so much that he was capable of beating Luke. On the other hand, despite gaining the power of fusion, Luke doesn't feel he has developed in any way, and although he continues working, his feelings of insecurity continue to grow. While in this state, Swirly continues to follow him around Goha Corporation. Meanwhile, the ninjas are still sneaking around attempting to hide Goha Yuga's items in places where Yuga will interact with them, until 2 of them are caught by Roman and Gakuto. Both would engage in rush duels and confiscate the items, kicking the ninjas out of Goha for trespassing. Gakuto would have confiscated Goha Yuga's crown, which he would hand over to the siblings. The siblings will be confused as they still have no memory of their mysterious 6th sibling, but choose to investigate. Simultaneously, Roman would have confiscated Goha Yuga's ID card, which of course states his name and shares Yuga's silhouette. Roman would keep this discovery secret and try to get information from Yuga, doing her own personal investigation. After a while, she clues in Gakuto and Luke about her discovery, and Gakuto would agree to investigate Yuga's background, while Luke is currently unfazed. During this time, we'd still get Roa vs Asana, attempting to investigate Yuga's home, which Roa would still win. Also, Roman and Gakuto would receive an extra duel each during their investigation. These would converse any 2 of the 6 co-girls, as they have been sent, unknown to us, by Otis to stall our group's investigation to ensure that Goha Yuga can return. It's all during this time that Swirly would get really fed up with Luke's moping and challenge him to a duel. It's in this duel that we'd see Swirly's true feelings about Luke, and how, despite how bad of an impression Luke made when they first met, Swirly always saw something in Luke's eyes that made him believe there was more to Luke than he let on, and he's really desperate to want that belief to be true. And with this revelation, Luke's spirit will be lifted slightly and he'd win the duel. And having mostly gotten out of his funk, Luke would be clued in into our group's investigation, only it's a bit too late. Despite 2 of the ninjas losing their items, Nanaho manages to encounter Yuga, and because of the change in backstory, Yuga has never met Nanaho before and therefore no longer has a fear of ladybugs, but like Roman and Gakuto, is suspicious of her and challenges her to a duel for trespassing. Yuga would win and confiscates his old deck. The darkness within the deck slowly seeps into Yuga, and he starts to somewhat recognize the cards, and begins having visions of his former life. He keeps his discovery secret from his friends who are all still investigating him. Back at home, he begins to spend more time with his Goha deck, even attempting to strategize with them, although strangely, he fumbles with his own deck at the same time. This is when the visions cement themselves as vivid memories, putting Yuga in a trance. In this trance, Yuga will blindly travel to the basement area where there is a card face down waiting for him. Seeing this on the security cameras, Yuga rushes after him and pushes past the other siblings who are on their way with Goha Yuga's crown. Checking the cameras for themselves, the other siblings find Luke, Roman and Gakuto and bring them down to the basement area as well. When they reach, they witness an already ongoing rush duel between Yuo and a possessed Yuga. On Yuo's final turn and the penultimate turn of the duel, Yuo fusion summons and deals significant damage to Yuga. Yuga draws for the final turn and draws the card that was waiting for him. At this moment, dark smoke billows out of the card, enveloping Yuga in a dark sphere. For a moment, Yuga breaks out of the trance, only in confusion, and the crown Goha Yuro has, the ID card that Roman has, and the badge that Yuo has all start glowing the same color as the smoke. In a flash, the ninjas scoop the items and throw them into the sphere, along with the others that they had. An explosion occurs, but this time no one is thrown back. the siblings instead have their memories returned, and as the smoke dissipates, Goha Yuga is finally revealed. Goha Yuga introduces himself and mostly explains what just happened and that his time has finally come. The ninjas formally come out of the shadows and kneel towards him. Goha Yuga uses an effect to destroy Yuo's fusion monster, and then he activates the card that resurrected him. Monster Reborn. He uses Monster Reborn to resurrect Yuo's monster onto his field, chants the ritual, and defeats Yuo with a direct attack. The audience attempts to help Yuo, but the ninjas confine them, preventing them from interrupting. As Yuo recovers from the attack, his eyes momentarily glow the same color as the smoke, and then he comes to and kneels towards Goha Yuga, addressing him as master. In shock, the Goha siblings, Yuro, Yujin, Yuka, and Yuran hurry out with Luke, Roman, and Gakuto, swearing to save Yuo. Before exiting the room, Luke manages to scoop Yuga's deck that fell towards him, and gives a look of resolve to Goha Yuga, while Goha Yuga stares back and cackles in victory. The rest of the siblings, along with Luke, Roman, Gakuto, Roa, Asana, and Nail on a video call, have all gathered at Yuga's lab, still in shock at what they just witnessed. The siblings explain their side of the story, and apologize to Team Rush, but both Gakuto and Asana give them the benefit of doubt. I know some people might sugar me having changed Monster Reborn's power from memory loss to mind control, as mind controlling Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a bit of a tired trope that has caused more harm than good to some characters, some examples including the Bracelet Girls from Mark V or Blue Angel from Vrains. Personally, I believe it to be the only kind of power to make sense, as with such a power it can allow for duels between characters that, unless they already opposed each other in some way, could never duel otherwise based on the story, despite how interesting the matchup could be. But even in 7s, I feel the way the memory loss worked was quite inconsistent, and not only did all characters get their memories back anyway, some didn't lose their memories at all, and it made some of the duels in the final arc feel quite hollow. I am aware that Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s did have its share of production issues which may have attributed to this, but obviously I don't have that handicap, therefore I am choosing to remove the memory recovery aspect of the final arc for something a bit more hard-hitting and emotional. Getting back to the rewrite, prior to this crisis, Yuga's custom format program had been released and is popular and continually growing. Hell-bent on correcting this mistake, Goha Yuga completes the half-finished format deletion program and prepares for transmission. Upon learning this, Nail shares this info with his siblings and Team Rush. Despite being presidents of Goha, even the siblings can't allow this to happen, and given the state Team Rush are currently in, they take it upon themselves to stop Goha Yuga. A while later, Nail alerts Team Rush with surveillance footage of the ninjas and Goha Yuo defeating the siblings and taking them under Goha Yuga's influence. Luke notices that they are all armed with their own copies of Monster Reborn. It is also noticed that Goha Yuga is unseen at any camera at Goha, which is when an alarm is triggered at the basement of Otis's relic. Switching to that camera, Team Rush witness an ongoing duel between Goha Yuga and Otis. Luke notices Otis losing in the same manner as everyone else, using Monster Reborn to resurrect an opponent's monster to your own field and win the duel with that attack. Otis loses the duel like normal, but manages to cling onto his sanity long enough to escape being put under Goha Yuga's control. In a rage, Goha Yuga returns to Goha Corporation, while Luke declares that he has figured out a way to defeat Goha Yuga. Our group hesitates until an explosion occurs at the opposite side of the lab, where a bunch of mind-controlled Goha employees arrive. Our group brace, but the employees fall to the ground, seemingly attempting to fight off the mind control. Our group conclude that the more people Goha Yuga attempts to control, the actual mind control is weaker. Seeing this, everyone shows more confidence in Luke's hope, and after confirmation from Nail, everyone agrees to a full siege of Goha Corporation. With this affirmation, he has everyone scrounge as many side characters as possible and meet him at a chosen location to meet to get organized. Luke awaits at a clearing, only to turn around and see the rest of Team Rush with a bunch of side characters. These can include characters like Tiger, Mimi, Swirly, etc. Despite his internal struggle, Nail shows up for the siege as well. This siege will be comprised of 3 parts, with the first part involving all of the side characters taking care of the nameless Goha employees, or at least keeping them restrained, so our Team Rush, which now includes Nail, Tiger and Mimi, can continue to the top. The second part has all of Team Rush except Luke, Tiger and Mimi taking care of the brainwashed siblings. The ninjas are not here for the siege as they are out searching for Otis, as per Goha Yuga's orders. Now who the siblings duel don't matter, as these duels don't need conclusive winners, as they are meant to stall, so our remaining 3 can deal with Goha Yuga. Well, Luke will be dueling him, but Tiger and Mimi will be observing the duel from the side. For the sake of argument, I will assign them to certain characters to make some references. Roa will duel Yuro, Roman will duel Yuka, Gakuto will duel Yuran, and Nail will duel Yuo. This is a reference to which crown each member will wear during the space duel. This leaves Asana to duel Yujin. Of course, Asana ends up wearing Goha Yuga's crown, but this is because the obvious third part of the siege is Luke vs Goha Yuga, so Asana is substituting for that reference. Now this duel is big for a few reasons. Some people might see this as Luke attempting to win back his pride, because that's how Luke thinks, and they're not completely wrong. This is where the earlier off-screen duel of Yujin vs Yuo comes into play, as by the transitive property, Since Yujin beat Luke, Yuo beat Yujin, and Goha Yuga beat Yuo, in Luke's eyes, that makes Goha Yuga the current king of duels, even if he doesn't realize it. So partly, Luke does see this duel as a way to earn back his title and his pride. But just like in the first season, Luke is going to prove that his friendship with our Yuga is more important than the title by trying to save him. This duel will mostly remain the same, with Luke finally maximum summoning and the ridiculous final turn, but he will mostly attempt to use Yuga's cards as a way to get through to our Yuga. It's also during the duel that Luke notices how perfect the deck is working against Goha Yuga, but he isn't sure why. Inside Goha Yuga's mind, our Yuga is floating in a smoke-filled void, and during this duel, he gets confronted by a ghostly manifestation of Goha Yuga. It's at this point that I realize how much I borrowed from previous Yu-Gi-Oh villains. The idea of a villain being split into pieces needing to be brought back together is from Zark, and I think it's debatable whether using items or characters is better. I'm not completely sure. And when battling your alternative personality within your own mind is from GX's Supreme King. Eventually, Luke will fusion summon 7 Gias the Magical Dragon Knight, as the physical representation of his friendship with Yuga, which may still its debut in the final duel, but given what this duel is, this being its debut works much better, even if I'm unsure how this would actually play out in the context of the duel. Just before the final attack, Luke will miraculously draw a wording fairy for the last time, and it's in this moment that Luke has a revelation. Even if he wins the duel, Yuga is still the king of duels. The fact is, it seems, even when under the trance, Yuga managed to break away from the trance just enough to reconstruct his deck accordingly to combat the Goha Yuga deck. Luke even considers if Yuga purposely dropped his deck towards Luke, entrusting his last wishes to him. Regardless, Luke manages to win the duel, and as he does, all the darkness from the employees seep out from them, dropping him to the floor temporarily unconscious and return to Goha Yuga, enveloping him again in a sphere of smoke. This time, however, because of our Yuga attempting to break free, a split occurs in the middle of the sphere, splitting it into 2 halves. One half is glowing yellow, while the other half is the same purple smoke. Eventually, an explosion occurs, with Yuga Odo and Goha Yuga flying back in opposite directions. Our Yuga falls into the arms of Luke, Roman, and Gakuto, who arrive straight after the Goha siblings collapsed, while Goha Yuga retreats to the original cave with the ninjas, who return just in time. During the explosion, the format deletion program fell, but Goha Yuga manages to scoop it before he leaves. While the siblings, Mimi and Nail, remain at Goha to put the company back into order, Team rush to the unconscious Yuga back home, where we meet his mother, who fills us in on her side of the story. She learns the rest of the story but claims that nothing about what she just heard makes her waver in her love for her son, and she's grateful for the friend group that he has that would go so far for him. Yuga eventually wakes up and attempts to apologize, but Luke stops him and reminds him of his similar situation during the previous arc. Interrupting them, a transmission appears on Yuga's monitor. A first-person view with no audio shows them entering Goha Yuga's cave, the ninjas being tied up away by some other unseen individuals, and with Goha Yuga seemingly recognizing the camera person. The unseen character appears to challenge and defeat Goha Yuga in a single turn, and then proceeds to bind him to the same contraption in episode 88, next up to the tied unconscious ninjas. The character allows for audio and turns the camera on themselves to reveal Otis. Otis congratulates Team Rush on their victory and reveals his side of the story regarding the siblings' backstory and the completion of Monster Reborn. This is also where it's fully revealed that all the co-girls were working with Otis the whole time, and as expected now, were the ones to tie up the ninjas off screen. He scoffs at Goha Yuga for his attempt of transmitting the format deletion program, and takes the program from him. Our team and Goha Yuga are convinced that he will use it himself, but to everyone's shock, he drops it on the floor and crushes it with his foot. He sneers at the idea of just deleting all non-Goha duel formats, and that he has something much bigger planned, and that it's already in motion, and that he'll gladly meet Team Rush at the destined battlefield. With that, he ends the transmission. Team Rush are in a bit of a panic, since Otis seems to always be one step ahead, despite always losing, but with Yuga in no way to currently cooperate, the rest of Team Rush, excluding Luke, go to Goha Corporation to speak with the siblings about what they just witnessed. With Yuga and Luke alone, Luke confronts Yuga about his recent realization, which Yuga admits is the truth. He was able to break away from the trance he was in and reconstructed his own deck just in case, and he smiles to sleep knowing he was right. On the other hand, Luke can't help but stare at Yuga, uncomfortably. For a moment, Luke was hoping that it was coincidental that choosing to use Yuga's deck to save him went perfectly well, but Luke feels he was just being strung along. And despite this uneasiness, we now move on to the final arc. This takes us to the final arc of the show, the King of Duels arc. As mentioned earlier, having changed Goha Yuga's ability from memory loss to mind control completely erases the memory recovery aspect of the final arc. Despite this, I'm taking a similar approach to it, but making it feel more full circle. Just like in that arc, each member of Team Rush will receive a final duel that will either complete their character arc or complement it. Otis, being the behind-the-scenes mastermind that he is, will engineer situations for all of them to have these duels, as mini-tests before the space duel. I got this idea from when Otis states he's putting Yuga to the final test of the Book of Sevens, and that's when I realised what to do with this arc. Instead of just Yuga being put to the test, Otis wishes to test all of our main 7 in some way before they come to the space duel. Yuga will be excluded as the space duel is meant to be his test, but that goes without saying. Before any of them, there is one duel that usually occurs in the previous arc, but given the changes I've made, I feel it works better here, which is Yuga vs Taiga round 2. After recovering from his ordeal, Yuga has an urge to confront Goha Yuga himself. Luke decides to join him, but just as they reach the amusement park, Taiga comes out of nowhere to stop them. Having witnessed Goha Yuga herself during the siege, Taiga believes it to be foolish to do so, since our Yuga and Goha Yuga are such opposites. But Yuga, being who he is, wants to attempt to try to understand Goha Yuga. Sick of this attitude, Taiga challenges him, with the stakes being if he wins, she'll let him pass. Taiga will go first, the duel will last 4 turns, and just like with Yuga vs Luke round 3, as Yuga attempts to make the final blow, Taiga will force a draw. Given he didn't win, Yuga agrees to leave with Luke. Now, I'm not just making this a draw just to avoid Yuga getting more losses, even though I am of the belief that Yuga shouldn't be taking any losses on the home stretch of the show. Despite that, this is more for Taiga and Luke. Luke notices how similar he acted to Taiga when he challenged Yuga in the previous arc, and this level of attention will play a part in his ceremonial duel later. Also, the original duel always bugged me because I couldn't understand what Taiga was really trying to do, even in the context of that episode. All Yuga and Luke wanted to do was help Swirly, yet Taiga was barging in calling Yuga's friendship fake, and the episode itself felt like a complete waste of time. Getting back to the main 7, the first person to have their ceremonial duel will be Gakuto, who will duel Ranze and Rinosuke. During the first season, it's shown that Ranze and Rinosuke have a deep respect and appreciation for Gakuto, and how he operates. Like I mentioned previously, Ranze and Rinosuke would stay at school to handle the necessary student council responsibilities. Otis, being who he is, has gradually increased their workload, to the point they are stressed and completely disorganized. So much so that after the Goha Yuga arc when Gakuto returns, they really lean into him and vent their frustration. Despite pitying them, they challenge him to a 2v1 rush duel, which he accepts. Originally, Gakuto duels Rinosuke, but I don't view that as a worthy challenge, given he's on the same level as Ranze, whom Gakuto has beaten, but by putting them together, although he would still win, any kind of 2v1 duel is going to be difficult, no matter the opponents. But having progressed and worked through his issues this rewrite, a 2v1 doesn't scare Gakuto at all, and if anything, he is able to perfectly convey how he deals with his stress, and how he remains organized to the siblings. Noticing the absurd and unusual student council workload, Gakuto decides to investigate, and although everyone will investigate into their ceremonial duel circumstances, no one will discover that the culprit is Otis until he reveals this truth during the space duel. Next up is Nail. Just like in the show, Nail has been struggling with his life as a lone wolf since his duel with Asana, but hasn't resigned from Goha yet. He's kept himself secluded in his quarters, struggling with it internally, so much so that his work figures have dropped. Otis decides to push the button further by hacking into Goha to worsen Nail's figures, which Yuo does catch wind of. Yuo once again storms into Nail's quarters, demanding that Nail works, until Nail finally reaches his breaking point. He proclaims that he wishes to resign from Goha to walk a new path, but Yuo, using his presidential authority, denies his request. Nail threatens Yuo with worse figures, until Yuo challenges him to a rush duel. If Nail wins, he's free to resign. However, if Yuo wins, Nail can't resign and must work even harder. I would have Yuo partly employ a hand destruction strategy to prevent Nail from summoning Yuga Drago. During Nail's final turn, he will still summon Yuga Drago, but then tribute it to tribute summon a new level 506 Cybus monster that gains an effect if it was tribute summoned by tributing a maximum monster. This summon is a representation of Nail's growth. Although he wishes to move on from his past intimidating self, that is still his basis, and he will use what he's learned to create a new version of himself. And with this monster, Nail wins the duel, and much like Gakuto, he attempts to investigate his circumstances. Next up is Asana. From the third arc, we know that a defining part of Asana's character is the long-eroded relationship between Mutsuba Heavy Machinery and Goha Corporation. Realizing this, Otis sends a message to Asana, supposedly from Goha, suggesting that their two companies should attempt to rekindle their long-lost professional relationship. He then sends another to the Goha siblings, suggesting the same, supposedly from Asana. When Asana and her crew meet up with the siblings, both are in confusion, as neither recalls sending either message. Despite this, Goha Yuro suggests that they should rekindle their relationship anyway, as it's been a long time coming. Everyone seems to agree except for Goha Yuka, who remains strong on the idea that Goha doesn't need a company as pathetic as Mutsuba to prosper. Galleon is incredibly insulted by this, and given the other siblings are in full agreement, Goha Yuka challenges Asana to a rush duel. If Yuka wins, the deal doesn't go through, but if Asana wins, Goha Yuka must agree, and the deal goes through. Goha Yuka remains the stronger duelist throughout the duel, hellbent on the idea that Goha is strong enough to stand by itself. During Asana's final turn, she shockingly summons Yuo's imaginary actor, alongside her very own Build Dragon. Yuo reveals he gave Asana this monster to prove a point, which Asana does by performing a fusion summon with these two monsters. I believe this fusion concept works both for Asana and Yuo, as all of Yuo's Matarion monsters require imaginary actor and a monster of a corresponding type. And to my knowledge, there isn't a Matarion monster that currently exists that is worm specific, so this could work. This is a representation of the fact that both companies are strong on their own, but can be even stronger if they work together, and with this new monster, Asana wins the duel. And with every previous ceremonial duel, the circumstances of the duel are being investigated. Now with Roa and Roman, their circumstances are going to be intertwined. As mentioned previously, Roman worked on some personal music pieces while working at Goha, and Otis manages to get himself a copy of them and sends them to Princess G's music label. Impressed, they send Roman an email, offering her a solo act with Princess G as her public mentor. Unknown to her, Otis also sent that email to both Roa and Yuga, so the next day, Yuga, Luke and Gakuto are on their way to congratulate Roman. Roa informs Geta and Ushiro, and the three of them are unsure if Roman will take the deal or not, given her loyalty to their group band, although Roa is convinced that this is the break Roman deserves, so he decides to create a scene with their help. The next day, Roman goes into the practice room to inform Roa of her news, where she is shocked to see Roa teaching Tiger guitar. The reason I chose Tiger is that she is a well-established side character, so this scenario doesn't feel too random, and she is shown to be musically involved, despite being more adept at woodwind instruments. This is where Roa, backed up by Geta, Ushiro and Tiger, make a scene calling out Roman for trying to break up the band. Usually, Roman can call Roa's bluff, but with three people backing him and his regular self-confidence, these accusations really hurt Roman, and she believes it. Upset and crying, Roman spits out that she's accepting the offer, taking her guitar and rushing out of the building. Without realizing, Roman shoves past Yuga, Luke and Gakuto, who are on their way to congratulate her. They notice her tears and attempt to catch up with her, but miss the bus she gets on. Confused and not willing to wait the time for the next bus, they all head in to ask Roa. Roa decides to keep the facade up, but Yuga doesn't buy it at all. Seeing Roa unwavering, Yuga challenges him to a rush duel. If Yuga wins, Roa must tell the truth, but if Roa wins, he can take Yuga's Seven's Road Magician. Everyone else is in shock hearing these terms, but Roa immediately accepts. The reason Yuga created these terms is Roa would have a strong incentive to agree, given the grudge Roa has regarding Seven's Road Magician from the first arc. Now I'll be honest, I've never really liked Yuga vs Roa round 2, not because of Yuga losing, but the way it's shown. I'm of the opinion that during the time of round 1, Yuga and Roa were equal duelists, despite Yuga winning that duel. To the point, if they were to duel 9 more times, they'd draw 5-5. With that in mind, you take them and their decks, develop them through the show till this point, disregarding maximums and fusions, they are still equal, with this duel being one of the 5 times Roa beats Yuga, which is what I'm doing. However, the show has gone out of its way to demonstrate how strong maximums and fusions are, with their debuts against Yuga defeating him. With that in mind, I believe it's an insult for Yuga to have both mechanics and still lose duels this late in the show. I fully agree that mechanics aren't what make duelists great, but Yuga has proven his dueling ability several times without them, so having them should just make his deck that much stronger, especially against someone who has dueled less frequently and has neither mechanic. I do believe the right decision is for Roa to win, but Yuga would purposely handicap himself by side decking out one or even both his maximum and fusion. This isn't meant to downplay Roa's skill, but give Roa a better chance, as there's a part of Yuga that wants Roa to win to fully get over his first arc grudge. This win finally proves to Roa that he never needed Seven's Road Magician to be special, so with Roa winning, he disregards the terms of the duel and comes clean to Yuga and co about why he upset Roman. He feels he never formally made up to Roman for the traitor stunt he forced her to play in the first arc, and that Roman going solo and having her own career with her idol is the break she deserves. This is where Yuga asks him if he even tried to ask Roman what she wants, which causes Roa to doubt himself. Some necessary time will pass for Roman to build up her image as a solo artist, and some time for Otis to build his robot. During episodes whenever he is mentioned or he is implied, I would make a cut to Otis working on his robot. We as the audience wouldn't clearly see what he's building, but know that he is doing something in the background which would allow for a bit more mystery, and seeing his robot at the start of the space duel will be a nice payoff to that mystery, rather than the robot coming out of nowhere. During the build-up of Roman's solo debut, Princess G has noticed some cracks in Roman's enthusiasm. Despite not having made up to Roa since he upset her, as a gesture of goodwill, Roman sends VIP tickets to Team Rush, including Geta and Ushiro, for her debut, which they all attend. Roman does get more cheerful seeing them on the sideline smiling at her, but before she starts, Princess G decides to interrupt and confront Roman. She announces to everyone that she knows this isn't what Roman genuinely wants and asks her to confess about her true choice. Roman falters and attempts to convince her and the audience this is what she truly wants. Annoyed and unconvinced, she challenges her to a rush duel to settle this dispute. Towards the end of the duel, Roman sees Roa encouraging and cheering for her in a way she's never seen before, finally realizing why he felt he had to upset her to make her take the deal. This is when she finally reveals to everyone that Princess G is right, and that she was going to decline the offer to the shock of everyone. Willow feels like an idiot and face palms, which is when Roman addresses him directly, calling him out and revealing that although she made some personal pieces, they didn't mean she wanted to go solo, although she does want to take the role of lead singer every once in a while. With that, Roman drags Roa, Geta and Ushiro onto the stage and hands them copies of Ready and has them perform it behind her for her final turn, in which she wins. Roa formally apologizes and the band is back together. Much like with the previous duels, Team Rush try to investigate who sent the record label Roman's pieces. At this point, the plot of the dual program erosion has been occurring as normal, but has only caused real attention just recently. Luke will attempt a giant Paulie effect, which then leads Team Rush under Luke's family mansion, where there are the crates of old watches. Team Rush will still meet Taiga and Akinori, however the circumstances of the upcoming duel will change slightly. Originally, Taiga calls out Yuga's inability to solve the current mystery, to which Luke comes to Yuga's defense. Instead, Taiga calls out Luke, who is equally determined to solve this mystery, which Taiga scoffs at, claiming that Luke is useless, not really being good at anything, including rush duels, the one thing he used to be the best at. Luke attempts to fire back at Taiga, using the same reason against her and calling her a useless gear, and that he's witnessed how her life doesn't seem to be going anywhere just like his. This really drives Taiga up the wall, who challenges Luke to see whose life really isn't going anywhere. During the duel, both siblings take good pokes at each other's life points till we get to the same situation in Luke's final turn, with one set card on Luke's field and Miragia Star F having just been destroyed by Taiga's trap. This is where Luke manages to relate to Taiga and explain for a long time that he did feel that his life was going nowhere, how he'd been so desperate to be the king of duels that once he had done it, nothing could stop him, but in truth, he stopped himself. And for the past 2 arcs he just couldn't stomach the idea that he was the runner-up to a person who he initially viewed as his rival, and grew to be his closest friend, Yuga, and that everyone else had grown since the tournament but he clearly hadn't. He also recognises the parallel when Taiga attempted to take her evident frustration out against Yuga, but in doing so couldn't win and had to force a draw, which is exactly what happened with Luke at the start of the previous arc. Taiga attempts to point out that Luke's set card is the same card that he used back then, but to everyone's shock he pulls the card out from his pocket. He reveals that he felt like a fool and that he couldn't just take a loss and move on from it. The card not being in his deck is a reminder to him that losing isn't the end of the world. He must move on and use that loss to grow and evolve, at which point he activates his trap card to summon back Dragius, boosts its attack and attacks the game in the calmest manner we've ever seen Luke. From this, the plot will continue as normal, with Team Rush going into space, with the space duel occurring as normal, except with the added reveal of Otis engineering all of Team Rush's final duels. Yuga would still attempt to go solo to finish the duel, to which Luke would join and challenges him to their final rush duel. The stakes would remain the same. If Yuga wins, Luke will return with everyone else, but if Luke wins, he'll go with Yuga to finish the duel. And before I get into this duel, I want to do a quick review on both duelists leading into this duel. The first review point being Yuga and Luke's dueling records. Despite the more major changes in the Season 2 half of this rewrite, Yuga's record currently stands at 18 wins, 1 draw and 6 losses, while Luke's record currently stands at 14 wins, 1 draw and 2 losses. With these in mind, Yuga and Luke are still quite equal, with Yuga still having more wins and losses, while the record of their rivalry currently stands at 1-1-1. This is the most equal record you could ask for heading into their final duel, and with no intention of a draw, whoever wins is clearly the better duelist. The next point is the turn order. Given Yuga is going to win, within the context of how most rush duels are scripted, the duel will last 4 turns, with Luke going first, and although turn order is never explained in the anime, there is a subtle story for why Luke goes first. In their first duel, Luke was trying to press that he was the best duelist at the school like he claimed, which is why he went first. In the Season 1 finale, Luke went second, having learned to make sure to go on the offensive first, and Yuga being a bit overconfident would want to go first, despite bricking. In round 3, Luke was desperate to emulate their last duel since he won that one, although this obviously didn't go to plan as that duel ended in a draw. With this final duel, Luke is going first, mirroring the first duel but going on the defensive, allowing Yuga to break his board so he can clap back straight after. With this, both duelists have gone first twice equally during their rivalry. Getting to the duel itself, there is the slight shenanigans of Yuga creating another 7's magician. Now I hold issue with Yuga being capable of this with just his deck case, since every other time has been with a whole duel disc. Personally, I would have Yuga fully create the card before the duel in anticipation of Luke attempting to go with him, as it would truly prove to Luke and us the audience that Yuga is without doubt the true king of duels. He knew Luke so well that he would need 7's magician, so he creates it before the duel. When Yuga draws and plays it, and when Luke is in space and looks at the card, it flickers in and out of being an ID card, but as Yuga calls his attack to win, the card stabilizes the 7's magician, meaning Yuga drew a legal card and played it legally winning him the duel with his duel record against Luke being 2-1-1. And that is my rewrite of Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's. I really hope you understood what I was trying to do here. Overall, I truly believe this rewrite gives Yuga justice in terms of his dueling ability, and gives Luke a true journey of character development. Also, I do want to point out a moment from episode 92 that better applies in this version. We see as Roman is holding Luke in an armbar, she starts a monologue of how the title of King of Duels was something that Luke could never reach, and while I understand in the story of the Book of Sevens that is true, I feel this is unfair to Luke in the show, as he'd remain undefeated only to lose one duel, and that one loss prevents him from being the King of Duels, especially when you consider till that point, Yuga was falling behind in terms of dueling ability, losing to opponents he'd already beaten before. However, in this rewrite, Roman's revelation makes more sense, as Yuga, throughout Season 2, had subtly stayed ahead of Luke, despite not noticing it, so I believe in this version, where Luke was chasing after Yuga for a while at the tail end, Luke finally believing he'd caught up, after all the hardship and development he went through, only to realise Yuga had already pulled ahead without him noticing, with moments like reconstructing his deck for Go High Yuga, or creating a second 7-row magician, better proves Roman's statement, and makes that moment hit harder. But I suppose the legitimacy of Roman's statement and monologue is up for interpretation, but that's my personal take on it, as was this entire rewrite. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good day.